Good morning, everybody. Good morning. This is the meeting of the Ballot Law Commission on April 5th, 2023, according to notice. The agenda for the morning has been distributed. It is primarily to hear results of tests of voting devices that have been used on a provisional basis in various towns, to consider a couple of requests for additional use, and then we will be hearing a presentation from District 24 candidate Lou Gargiulo, who requested the chance to address us on concerns he had about the election when he filed an appeal with us that was resolved, and part of the resolution was to allow him to address the Ballot Law Commission on his concerns. So that's what we're going to do. We don't have a... No. Okay. The background, for those of you who have not followed these things, and I think most of you have, because I see a lot of familiar faces, but the background on this is that we have been informed by the supporting organization for the AccuVote machines that they will not be supporting those devices, or can't promise to support those devices after the 2024 elections, and therefore the statutory requirement is that the Ballot Law Commission identify and certify one or more successor devices that can be authorized for use in New Hampshire. As you know, in New Hampshire, it's up to towns and cities to elect to use or not to use ballot counting devices and to buy them. It is our hope that we will have this process completed so that we will have identified and resolved this process by the fall of 2023. And that's why we've been doing tests in real life circumstances in elections that we have concluded, and we'll be hearing results of audits and results of the tests from the Secretary of State, and we have town officials from some of the towns that heard them or that used them, and they'll be welcome to add their comments after the Secretary of State's report. The first order of business on the agenda is let's introduce the people that are here so we can identify people for the record and for the audience. Starting with
David Scanlon, Secretary of State.
David Campbell, Commissioner from Nashua.
Michael Gargiulo.
Brad Cook, Chairman from Manchester.
Kathleen Sullivan, I'm a member from Manchester.
Bob McConnell from Massillon, Commission member.
Christopher Messier, alternate member from Manchester.
And Mr. Chairman, Senior Deputy Secretary of State Patty Lovejoy is joining us as well.
Great, thank you. We do not have anybody from the Attorney General's office here today because we didn't think we had any questions of law to deal with. This is primarily just reports that we're receiving from various folks. So the first order of business is consideration of the minutes of the January 11th meeting.
I move we accept the minutes of the meeting of January 11th, 2023.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Let's vote. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, it's yours.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to invite Eric Forcier and Jen Cote to come up and talk about the results from the recent tests or trials that we've had of some of the ballot counting devices. We're out there over the course of town meetings, on the day of the town meeting and then on the day of the postponed town meeting because of the snowstorm. We did test 3 different devices, one made by Dominion, one by ES&S, and one by Clear Ballot. Dominion was actually tested in 2 large towns, Londonderry and Milford, and Eric and Jen, if you could talk about the results of those tests.
Sure. So as the Secretary said, we piloted 3 devices in 4 towns. We piloted Clear Ballot in Ashland, and there was one device there. ES&S in Winchester, which also had one device. And Dominion in Londonderry and Milford, which used 6 devices each, 12 devices total. 3 were devoted to school and 3 were devoted to the town ballots in each town. So following the audit, just to give you, we have determined that each ballot counting device is capable of accurately tabulating a ballot for those ballots with a properly filled in corresponding oval. And the results of the hand count audit were all within expected margins, and each ballot counting device in each town passed the audit. So the audit that we conducted looked to whether the machine, based on the marks made in the ovals on the ballot, accurately tabulated results. The audit had no effect on the results of the election, and election night results were the official results for each town, and only the results generated by the different devices were audited. In order to ensure that the piloted ballot counting devices accurately tabulated results, a number of candidate races and warrant articles were required to be audited. So in each town, we audited any contested race, town operating budgets, school operating budgets, any charter amendments, any bond questions, and at least one random question on every side of a ballot page with at least one voting opportunity, which did not include one of the previous requirements. In Ashland, there were no contested candidate races, so we also chose one random candidate race in the school and the town election. The random questions were selected prior to the audit, but remained non-public to all poll officials and all moderators, town clerks, anybody involved with the audit until the morning of the audit. Each audit showed that there were discrepancies within the expected margins. In most cases, the discrepancy stemmed from a reduction in the number of undervotes, with a candidate picking up a vote. In 2 cases, there were discrepancies conclusively due to human error based on mathematical errors, which we were able to determine based on a review of the original audit worksheets. And more extensive details of all discrepancies, including the 2 conclusively due to human error, are included in each report. In all cases, no discrepancy would have impacted the results of any election, and again, all ballot counting devices passed the audit, and all discrepancies were within the expected margins.
Good question.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. What are the expected margins in terms of percentages and where these lie in? So there's an expected margin, and then where do they fit within that margin?
Sure. So any ballot, any audited question that we looked at, if it was more than 2 difference, then it would be outside the expected margins, and we would review the results of that audit to ensure that it was human error or if it was a true discrepancy by the machine. In no cases did we find that a discrepancy was outside of those 2 to 3 differences, and any discrepancy that was outside of that was due to human error and was reviewed.
Right. So you're saying that 2 is the number? Everything was less than 2 except for human error, which of course is human error and has to be.
I think it was 3 in.
I believe there's one example where we were 3 off. So we're talking 3 out of a couple thousand ballots. I think we had most of the discrepancies were 1 or 2 off, and I'll have to look through the tables. There might be one that's 3. Any of the ones that are more than that, I think there's one that's an example of 10. We found the worksheet where the mathematical error was done as part of the tallying. So not more than 2 or 3. It's detailed very.
One case 3, more than 2 in one case.
I believe there's one case of 3.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
and so is that the norm? I mean, you say the norm based on thousands of examples, machines.
So we have experience in recounts, and we're joined by folks like Patty Lovejoy, who's been doing recounts, and Dave Scanlon for a long time. So we know that during a recount of any AccuVote device, and our experience of auditing AccuVote devices last fall, there's always a slight change when a human counts a stack of ballots versus a machine. 1, 2, or 3 votes being gained by a candidate is something we often see in a recount. You never have a perfect match. So we know that a human or humans counting ballots, especially a couple thousand of them, we always see a margin of 1, 2, or 3 off from a machine tape. And in this instance, a lot of them were, as Jen was saying, a lot of them were the machine on election night would have an extra undervote, whereas the humans counting them would attribute that undervote to a candidate or a yes or no question. It's usually an undervote lost, and a candidate gaining a vote.
I guess I don't understand that.
Sure.
What you're saying is the ones that aren't, I mean, there's 1, 2, and 1 case 3 discrepancies. Taking the human error part out, which is always there. So the reasons for those are undervotes, you're saying?
We believe those, it's hard to isolate the exact reason because there's a lot of factors moving into why there's 1, 2, or 3 off. Oftentimes it is human error. Oftentimes if you're auditing a warrant article, and it's yes or no, you're making stacks of yes or no, and a stack of undervotes if there's no yes or no selected, so you have 3 piles in front of you, yes, no, and undervote. After you sort the yeses and nos, you count those piles to see how many yeses and how many nos you have. There's always a chance somebody puts a no in the yes pile, and that's why you have a 1 difference. That's an example we see when humans are doing it. Then you do it again, and you're doing it over 2,000 ballots. You might be off by 1 again. Those are the expected margins we're used to seeing during recounts, and that's why we call it within the expected margins.
And undervotes would be a pile with nobody filling it out at all.
Correct. If it's a vote for not more than 2, they chose 1 candidate and did not choose a second candidate, or if it's a warrant article, they didn't choose yes or no.
And last question, why wouldn't it be overvotes? Why wouldn't somebody potentially vote yes and no? Wouldn't that be an overvote?
So yes, we were looking for overvotes. The machines were programmed, we'll talk about the clear ballot one, but the other machines were programmed to reject overvotes. So we didn't expect to see an overvote in any of the piles because they should have been rejected by the machines. In which case it'd be put in the hand count bin, and the hand count bin was not part of the audit because we were only auditing the machine results tape. We're looking to make sure that the machine can accurately tabulate ballots. We don't necessarily care about the hand count because it's not part of the audit of the machine. But we can talk about clear ballot, the overvote clear ballot. There was one instance with the clear ballot device where an overvote was found in the pile. So I'd ask Jen just to speak to that.
Right, so in Ashland, where Clear Ballot was piloted, there was an audit of the town trustee of the trust funds. And in that case, there was a ballot that, to the human eye, and based on what we perceived, there should have been an overvote that should have been rejected by the device. But after talking with Clear Ballot, the way that they look at the ballots is they determine it dynamically, and there's a much more concise explanation than I'd be able to give from Clear Ballot in the report. But they basically say that there's a method for determining the threshold of whether a mark should be counted as a vote, and it depends on whether the software is making a determination for the baseline darkness of the blank oval. And in that case, the machine did not read it as an overvote because of the difference in the darkness between the 2 ovals. It
appreciates the whole ballot and looks how the voter voted on other races as part of its determination of whether or not an overvote is in fact an overvote. It's an advanced technology that appreciates more than just that oval, and so in that instance I think there was an X over it, am I correct?
I don't know.
I don't have the ballot in front of me, but there was a more thorough explanation by the vendor as to why that one ended up in the pile, but we believe that's the only overvote in all of the ballot counting devices that we've been piloting this past election and last fall. But that one is explained in the audit report from the vendor as to why their technology read it the way it did.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Isn't it true that the discrepancy between a hand count and the machine count can often be because of extraneous markings on the ballots that go through the machines, and therefore the machine reads something differently than a person would read?
That's a very good point. That's one of the factors it could be. There's so many factors that go into why you're off by 1 or 2. It could be a human error. It could be that. A very example you just gave. Yes, when we found the human error that we could attribute it to, it's noted in that report. The ones that we can are within 1 or 2, which is what we presume is human error because that happens when you count a stack of ballots. But there's a lot of factors that it's difficult to isolate why it's 1 or 2 off on 2,000. But when we do recounts and we do audits like we did last fall of the AccuVote devices, it's very typical to see that kind of margin.
In some cases as well, we have candidate races where it's vote for not more than 2, vote for not more than 3, and there may be significant write-in campaigns in some of these towns where people write in and don't fill in the bubble, so the machine will read it as an undervote, but the humans counting it are so accustomed to just reading off the name, and every once in a while one of those slips through, even though we give very specific instructions to look for that. But I believe in Milford we had over 12,000 ballots that we were dealing with, so 1 or 2 happened to slip through.
12,000 pieces of paper because the ballots are multi-page at the town election. It was challenging for us in doing it at the municipal elections as opposed to last fall. 1 piece of paper versus 4, 5, or 6. So that's another complicating factor that attributes to human error over a 10-hour audit. But when we're done a particular race and we're looking at it and we're within 1, 2, or in 1, maybe 2 circumstances, I think just 1 of 3, we look at it and we say, are we comfortable with this being within the expected margins to move on to the next warrant article? And when you see 1, 2, or 3 off over 12,000 pieces of paper, or in some instances 5,000, you're comfortable enough that you know that it counts accurately and you move on to the next audit item. We would consult with the moderator and make a decision between the Secretary of State's office and the moderator whether we were comfortable with the audit results versus the machine tape, and then move on to the next one.
Commissioner Letourneau.
As a person who was at the Ashland elections, there were 6 ballots, double-sided, and so there was just under 400 votes, right?
In Ashland, yes.
Yeah, just about 397 or 398 people who voted, and it's 6 ballots, double-sided. And so having just 1 overvote like that, then the recount was pretty amazing. And you know, what all the pen has to do is just touch that oval, and the scanner picks it up. And even though they filled the oval on the side they wanted to vote on, they made a mark, some kind of a mark. They may have had the pen in their hand, and they were looking at it, and made a mark, and it picked it up as an overvote. Is that correct?
In some instances, yes. It depends on the how thick the mark is, depending on each machine's a little differently. But yes, there are plenty of examples where that would kick it out as an overvote. It would be in the hand count pile, not part of our audit.
I'd note for the record that Commissioner David Hess has joined us. So, welcome.
Chairman, thank you. My apologies for being late.
That's all right. Other questions from the
Quick find a parking spot, right?
Mr. Sullivan?
Let's keep going. It's just red. Can you get this off?
I believe that's a camera and this is a microphone.
Okay.
So I think the red means it's on, but that's
I'm used to Alexa.
above my pay grade. Go ahead.
If you were to compare the audit results from these towns and your experience with other recounts previously, would you say, I understand it's within acceptable margins, did these new machines do better than the old machines, or are we still talking about the same performance in terms of the
So
results?
when you say better than the AccuVote,
Yeah.
is I presume what you're asking. So I would say that there are many pros and cons to each device that we're piloting. There are some features that are not being turned on because they're not in compliance with New Hampshire law. There are all kinds of bells and whistles to each device. There's pros and cons to each device that at another meeting I think we'll dive into, and we'll talk about, you know, every one of the ballot counting devices that we have piloted has in fact passed the audit. They are capable of accurately counting New Hampshire ballots within the expected margins. I can't say that one counts better than the other. There's a lot of factors into why you're off by 1, 2, or 3. So I think what we're here to say today, the limited purpose today is to say these devices passed the audit. We're going to talk about continued pilots. At some point in the future, I think you'll hear from us and perhaps others the pros and cons of each device as we accumulate those lists. But all of them have passed in the same fashion that they accurately count ballots. I can't say that they count them better than the AccuVote necessarily. We did audits of AccuVotes last fall, and they were very successful. Those ballot counting devices are still very much capable of counting ballots within acceptable margins. It's just a matter of that technology is getting older. Those parts are not going to be available anymore. There needs to be a future, but it doesn't mean that the AccuVotes currently are not performing at the same level in accuracy.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, just following up on that, you said the AccuVotes are in place, the machines we use now. You said they were in the accepted margin as well. Do you recall what that was?
So we did, the legislature required us to do audits for the first time of AccuVote devices last fall for the state primary and the state general election. I don't have the reports in front of me, they're on our website, but they I would say very similar to the results you see here in these audits without having gone through it in a little while. They passed those audits. We were very comfortable that the ballot counting devices that were audited were tabulating accurately. It's
1, 2, or 3 comparable.
I would say, I don't want to, yes,
I
it was,
understand, you don't have it in front
I
of
don't
you.
have it in front of me, but I remember being very comfortable that the AccuVote devices, the entire team, we had a vendor that we hired, Clear Ballot, who does audits all over the country, or a lot of audits around the country, and they were hired by the state to assist with the audits. We bought hardware and software subscriptions to conduct those audits. They were on site with us, and the audit team was appointed by the Secretary of State and included a lot of people, and we did a lot of audits last fall of AccuVote devices, and everybody on the audit team, including the Secretary of State, were very comfortable with the results. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they...
And an additional function with the clear ballot audits of the AccuVote devices was a 5% random review of the ballots. So it basically scans a picture of the ballot, and you look at the picture, and it tells you how the clear ballot device counted those votes, and the human looks and says, do I agree with how it was counted? And for I think we did 6 total audits between the primary and general, and I don't recall ever seeing one that was different from the human eye versus what the clear ballot device counted it as.
Just let me explain it my way. We would take the election results, we take the AccuVote results tape last fall. We know what the election results were on at least the tape's results, not the hand count necessarily. And we would run those same ballots through a different software ballot counting device, the Clear Ballot, and they would give us the results of the election, and we compare it. But in addition to that, we pull up 5% required. Look at the ballot on a screen, look at how the Clear Ballot device read that ballot versus how you were reading it, looking at it. And there was an audit requirement of 5%. And not one of them went outside of, we didn't find one where an oval was filled in, but the Clear Ballot found a different oval filled in. It was a perfect match in that regard. Those audits last fall were very successful.
So I thank you. I realize that this is probably, as you say, subject to another meeting, but there's lots of bells and whistles on each machine. Some are turned off to comply with our law.
Correct.
Are you satisfied, without getting into all the details of the next meeting, but were they pretty much apples to apples once you turn off the bells and whistles?
That was our attempt to do so. It was to try to make them to mimic an AccuVote as much as possible, reject overvotes, and apples to apples is pretty close. I think the Clear Ballot device that we talk about in the report had a function. Looking at the overvotes, that's a difference between the other ones. The one that we found an overvote, I think that's a little different, making it not an apple to an apple necessarily, but pretty darn close. But they do all have bells and whistles and other great features that were not necessarily turned on, and they're excited to show. I think all the vendors are excited to show New Hampshire all the great things that the machine can do if we're willing to change our law. But for this purpose, for this pilot, count it like an AccuVote does to the best you can. We want to make sure that it can tabulate results accurately.
Great, thank you.
And you will recall that we have done a demonstration on a different device back at the general election. So it's not just these 3, but we've had 4 that have been tested and re-examined and explained. So we're not here today to choose among them.
No, I know that.
We're just to get the report on how they worked. Anything else from the commission for these? We have election officials here from, I know at least Milford.
Chairman, would you mind if I just follow up?
Please.
Before you do that, first, Deputy Secretary Aaron Hennessy has joined us as well. In the fall general election, we tested an open source device called Voting Works in 3 polling places, and when you look at their software and the software of the 3 devices that we tested in the round of town meetings, I think all 4 have viable software components, and I think all 4 of them, in terms of software, will count New Hampshire ballots. And that's a good thing. Where there are differences are in the hardware, and after Voting Works conducted their trials in the fall, we were very critical of some of the hardware components, the box or the container that the ballots went into, the feed, and things like that. And Voting Works listened to the criticism that we made, and actually came back a couple of weeks ago and did a presentation on the improvements that they had made addressing the concerns that were raised. They dramatically increased the feed for the ballot to go into the device. the box for holding ballots under the device was very substantial, and the actual feed was much better, a good display screen. And so one of the other agenda items is that we're going to ask if we can do some additional tests. And we would like to test that device in Moultonborough, I believe. And then Hanover has requested a test in their May municipal election, and so we'd like to do another test there as well. A lot of what we need to do at this point, moving forward with the devices, is take a hard look at the hardware issues, and they were not significant, but in the other machines, just to make sure that those can be addressed. We want to make sure that the software in those machines meets the certification standards that are recognized by the EAC. Not only the ones that currently exist, but the ones that they are about to improve. If we're going to get one of these devices, we should make sure that it meets the most up-to-date standards that are out there. And then I think it would be a good idea for us to develop a matrix that we can use to judge the devices that are out there, and then have user groups come in to do a test and fill out the matrix and then compare groups. And I would suggest that we do that with the election officials, and then we have a group of just voters come in, and I think the Ballot Law Commission ought to be a group as well. And just have those groups fill out the matrix, so that we can see what the preference is per group. And then this fall we have a round of city elections coming up, so that's another opportunity to test the devices and certainly test any improvements that have been made to the devices based on any critique that we've made moving forward.
Thank you. You answered the question I was going to ask later. Yes, Commissioner Sullivan.
When you talk about the municipal elections, you're talking the municipal primaries, because November, the general elections are getting close to the end of the year, and we, as Brett was saying, we're hoping to get this done in the fall.
I'm saying that actually any election that we hold between now and whenever you make your decision is an opportunity to test.
Okay.
And there are going to be a couple of special elections for the State House that are additional opportunities. And then there should be just a general public comment period for anybody that has thoughts on these devices to speak about them.
Well, we're going to devote for the commissions and the public's knowledge, we're going to work on a schedule of meetings so that we can know exactly when we're going to decide what, when, and build into it the ability to have those independent examinations, or at least reports that have already been made to verify things so we can comply with the standards that we established earlier. So,
Thank you.
we'll be working on that schedule. We have election officials here. I know from Commissioner Letourneau was one in Ashland. We have people from Milford and Londonderry at least. I don't know if we have anybody from Winchester here. But
Mr. Chairman, they wanted to be here. I did not realize at the time that there would be public comments, so I said that would occur at a later date.
this isn't public comment, these are officials.
from the officials.
Yeah, so, well, a couple of them asked me if they could, so I said yes.
Okay,
So,
well, we'll make sure that Winchester has their opportunity.
so if Londonderry and Milford could come up, thank you, and tell us whatever they want to tell us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I do have draft orders for the...
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that yet.
Okay, come back.
He read ahead.
Thank you.
Crop TV.